The IEP, or an Individualized Education Plan, is a written document that's developed for each child who attends a public school and who is eligible for special education. Clearly, the IEP is a very important document for children with disabilities and for those who are involved in educating them. Now, when done correctly, the IEP should improve teaching, learning, and results. Each child's IEP describes the educational program that has been designed to meet that child's unique needs. The writing of each student's IEP takes place within the larger picture of the special education process under IDEA. If the child is found to be a child with a disability, as defined by IDEA, he or she is eligible for special education and related services. Within 30 calendar days after a child is determined eligible, the IEP team must meet to write an IEP for the child. By law, certain individuals must be involved in writing the child's individualized education plan. These people must work together as a team to write the child's IEP. Each team member brings important information to the IEP meeting. Members share their information and work together to write the student's individualized education program. Each person's information adds to the team's understanding of the child and what services the child needs. By law, the IEP must include certain information about the child and the educational program designed to meet his or her unique needs. In a nutshell, this information includes the student's current level of performance, annual goals, and how progress will be measured, special education and related services, participation with non-disabled children, participation in state and district-wide tests, needed transition services, the environments where services will be provided, how to include a child in the regular education environment and provide access to the general education curriculum. Let's take a closer look at the components of the IEP. The IEP must state how the child is currently doing in school, or better known as the present levels of educational performance. This information usually comes from the evaluation results, such as classroom tests and assignments, individual tests given to decide eligibility for services, or during reevaluations, and observations made by parents, teachers, related service providers, and other school staff. The statement about current performance includes how the child's disability affects his or her involvement in progress in the general education curriculum. Knowing how the student is currently performing in school will help the team determine annual goals to address those areas where the student has identified educational needs. Annual goals are goals that the child can reasonably accomplish in a year. The goals are broken down into short-term objectives or benchmarks. Goals may be academic, address social or behavioral needs, relate to physical needs, or address other educational needs. The goals need to be written in an observable and measurable way, meaning that it must be possible to measure whether the student has achieved the goals, so data needs to be collected on each goal and objective so that the teacher can show that the student is making progress. You'll learn how to write these goals as you move on in your educational program. But do remember, goals need to be crystal clear. So the IEP states how the child's progress will be measured and how parents will be informed of that progress. It's important to specify exactly how a child's progress is going to be tracked. Is data going to be collected every week? Once a month? What data will be collected? What observations will be made? How will we know how a student is progressing towards their goals? It is very important that we are precise about these efforts so that we can really monitor a student. In order to benefit from special education, a child may require any of the following related services. Related services, as listed under IDEA, include the different areas listed on the slide. Related services are supportive services which are required to assist a child to benefit from special education. Such services include speech pathology and audiology, psychological services, physical and occupational therapy, counseling services, and all other services you see on this list. The term related services also includes transportation and school health services, social work services, and parent counseling and training. You see a list of related services on the slide, but this list is not exhaustive. What related services a child needs is decided by the IEP team and is based on the child's needs. Not every child will need speech services, for instance, but some will. The IEP must explain the extent, if any, to which the child will not participate with non-disabled children in the general education environment and other school activities. Most states and districts give achievement tests to children in certain grades or age groups. The IEP must state what modifications in the administration of these tests the child will need. If a test is not appropriate for the child, the IEP must state why the test is not appropriate and how the child will be tested instead. The IEP must state when services will begin and how often they'll be provided, where they will be provided, and how long they will last. How many hours per week of special education services will the child receive? How many hours a week of therapy will the child receive? In addition, the child's placement, where the IEP will be carried out, must also be decided. Placement decisions must be made according to IDEA's least restrictive environment requirements, commonly known as the LRE. These requirements state that, to the maximum extent possible, children with disabilities must be educated with children who do not have disabilities. What type of placements are there? Depending on the needs of the child, his or her IEP may be carried out in the general education classroom, with supplementary aids and services as needed. In a special education classroom, where every child in the class is receiving special education services for some or all of the day. In a special school, at home, in a hospital, or in another setting. One has to include on the IEP the extent to which the child will be included in the general education environment. A child with a disability may not be removed from age-appropriate regular classrooms solely because of modifications that are needed in the general education curriculum. It also needs to be specified on the IEP what accommodations will be needed by the student in the general education environment. For example, if the child has low vision, an accommodation might be to provide him with assignments in large print. If the child is 16 or older, there needs to be a statement of transition planning. In Illinois, beginning when the child is aged 14 and a half, or younger if appropriate, the IEP team needs to start planning for the child's school to adult life transition. What goals does the student have after school that schools can work on with him or her? And what support system is it anticipated that the student will need after graduation from school? You'll have a whole module on transition coming up. Depending on the needs of the student, the IEP team needs to consider what the law calls special factors. These include the child's behavior interfering with his or her learning or the learning of others. The IEP team will consider strategies and other supports to address the child's behavior. If the child has limited proficiency in English, the IEP team will consider the child's language needs as these needs relate to his or her IEP. If the child is blind or visually impaired, the IEP team must provide instruction in Braille or the use of Braille unless determined after an appropriate evaluation that the child does not need this instruction. If the child has communication needs, the IEP team must consider those needs. If the child is deaf or hard of hearing, the IEP team will consider his or her language and communication needs. This includes the child's opportunities to communicate directly with classmates and school staff in his or her usual method of communication, for example, sign language. The IEP team must always consider the child's need for assistive technology devices or services. What technology might help the child to be successful in school? There are over 20,000 assistive technology devices for children with disabilities. For example, a child who is hard of hearing might need there to be a special FM unit in the classroom where the teacher speaks into a microphone and that transmits her voice to an FM receiver used by the child. And that technology would enable the child to hear the teacher. It's very important to understand that each child's IEP is different. The document is prepared for one specific student. It describes the individualized education program and supports designed to meet that learner's needs. When the IEP has been written, parents must receive a copy at no cost to themselves. The IDEA also stresses that everyone who will be involved in implementing the IEP must also have access to the document. Each of these individuals needs to know what his or her specific responsibilities are for carrying out the child's IEP. This includes the specific accommodations, modifications, and supports that the child must receive, according to the IEP, in addition to the goals each teacher will be targeting. Once the IEP is written, it's time to carry it out. In other words, to provide the student with the special education and related services as listed in the IEP. This includes all supplementary aids and services and program modifications that the IEP team has identified as necessary for the student to make progress toward his or her IEP goals, to be involved in and progress in the general education curriculum, and participate in other school activities. The IEP team must review the child's IEP at least once a year. One purpose of this review is to see whether the child is achieving his or her annual goals. The team must revise the child's individualized education program. Although the IDEA requires this IEP review at least once a year, in fact, the team may review and revise the IEP more often. Either the parents or the school can ask to hold an IEP meeting to revise the child's IEP. For example, the child may or may not be progressing towards his or her IEP goals, and his teacher or parents may be concerned. On the other hand, the child may have met most of his or her goals on the IEP, and new ones need to be written. In either case, the IEP team would meet to revise the IEP. If the parents do not agree with any part of the IEP and placement, they may discuss their concerns with other members of the IEP team and try to work out an agreement. If they still disagree, parents can ask for mediation, or the school may offer mediation. Parents may file a complaint with the state education agency and may request a due process hearing, at which time mediation must be available. The IEP is the cornerstone of special education. Writing and implementing an effective IEP involves many people, many different steps, and collaborative decision making. Remember, special education is not a place. It's a set of services and supports. In the resource section, please download and review a blank copy of the Illinois State Board of Education IEP form.